Happy October. Happy spooky season. You know, I am not at all surprised by this video coming out. It was voted as the viewer's choice review, so stay tuned. That's coming up here on Drew's Book Reviews. Good day, and welcome to another episode of Drew's Book Reviews. So today we are going to do the viewer's choice review from my most recent Next 5 Reads video. So as always, I put up a poll for the next 5 reads so that you, my viewers, could vote on which one of the next 5 reads you really want to see me do a book review of. And given it is October and scary season, I am not at all surprised by the result. Today we are going to talk about Grimm's Fairy Tales. So let's get into Grimm's Fairy Tales, my thoughts on this collected works of Grimm's Fairy Tales. And of course, make sure you hit that like button, comment, and subscribe. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments down below. So let's talk about Grimm's Fairy Tales. So this is the collected works by Canterbury Press. It's actually one of my favorite books on my shelf just because I love the look and feel of this book. So this has well over 200, about 201 fairy tales plus 10 legends from Grimm's collected works and Grimm's Fairy Tales. It's a collection of some of our most favorite fairy tales. Cinderella is a well-known Grimm's fairy tale. It was, and of course everybody knows Disney's Cinderella. But let me tell you, Disney's Cinderella is not anywhere close to the reality of Grimm's fairy tales. These tales are probably not the kind of tales you really want to read your kids as a bedtime story. Now, I've been reading this book and these fairy tales, honestly, to my youngest daughter, Maya, who, for the most part, was enjoying them. But honestly, she kind of got bored with it after a while, and I guess I can't blame her because in a lot of ways, the Grimm's fairy tales, they seem to have a reoccurring theme. That there's a prince or a princess, and of course, the princess is always in need of being rescued. She is being held captive or under some kind of spell and enchantment. And none of the princes in all the lands could rescue and save her, and the king is desperate and must have his daughter saved. And to some effect, that kind of trope, I guess, and that kind of storytelling. So many of these stories revolve around that kind of concept, and usually it's the one most worse off character peasant that manages to obtain some kind of magical ability from some kind of magical creature to rescue the princess, and they become the king and she becomes queen and they live happily ever after. Mostly, kind of, sort of, sometimes, not quite. It's Grimm. What can I say? It's Grimm's Fairy Tales. It's not always a happy ever after ending. I mean, just going back to the Cinderella story as an example, like they literally cut off part of their feet in order to fit into the slipper to win the prince's hand. So it definitely revolves around these kind of themes throughout the book. One of the things that you will notice in Grimm's Fairy Tales if you haven't read them, and you have to keeping in mind this is much older writing, this kind of thing was pretty common at the time, is a lot of the themes revolve around it is women are basically possessions. It's very sexist in that sense that the women are being given away. They're being sold to, suitors and princes. The men get the choice, they want the girl, but the girl doesn't get the choice, even though it's portrayed in such a way that, they lived happily ever after and she got everything she wanted. Really, she's just being given away by the king instead of having her own choice. So much of the themes around the princes and the princesses within this story are around that. One thing I did notice with Grimm's Fairy Tales as well is they definitely tend to have more of a racist overtone in many circumstances. And there's like over 200 fairy tales in this book, so I don't recall which one precisely, but I do recall one of the stories reference the difference between black people and white people and referred to the white people as pure and awesome and just great and intelligent and smart, and the black people and they were dumb and stupid and slow because they were black. So definitely there is that racist overtone in many of the stories as well that I found with Grimm's Fairy Tales. But these what are considered classic fairy tales are like the foundation of the fairy tales that we know of in our world. Disney took those fairy tales and made them into something much more kid-friendly than what we find within Grimm's Fairy Tales actual real-world collection. So in terms of that, if you're going to read these fairy tales, they definitely have a more sexist and racist overtones, and they definitely seem to have a reoccurring theme when it comes to rescuing princesses and magic and that kind of thing. But it's not all about princesses and kings and queens and princesses and magic castles and things like that. Definitely a lot of it. Some of the stories have focuses around death and the devil, and selling your soul to the devil to get everything that you want out of life as well, and regretting those decisions. So some of these fairy tales certainly have their moral side to it as well, or moral of the story, so to speak, that when you sell your soul to the devil, when you become so hyper focused on certain things, they can overrule you, and in the end they could have the power to ruin your life, not make them better. So it definitely has some of that moral tellings within the fairy tales as well, the classic moral to the story, so to speak. And there's even some ghost stories, speaking of death, and even some fairy tales or myth kind of told in a mythological way, I found, with how mankind got all of his age and why we live as long as we live. The dog wanted extra years, but was offered extra years but didn't get it. And same with a few other animals, and man said, hey, I'm going to take my 30 years and I'm going to take all their years they gave up. And this is why we end up, starting as babies into adulthood to becoming old, bitter, cranky old people who basically revert back to babies again. That was kind of the idea portrayed within some of these stories. So overall, my enjoyment of reading the fairy tales, I have to say I did enjoy going back and kind of reading Grimm's fairy tales. I thought it was very interesting to see how what those fairy tales were in reality, and not just the Disney-fied version of these fairy tales. I actually started watching Grimm on Amazon Prime because, as I understood, it's a TV show. It's basically inspired by the creatures and things from Grimm's fairy tales. I'm actually really enjoying the Grimm TV series on Amazon. It's a bit of an older series at this point, but I'm enjoying it. It's got that inspiration from Grimm's fairy tales. In terms of the writing style itself, this is an older work, and I have found with a lot of older work, even including works such as Edgar Allan Poe's works or H.P. Lovecraft, sometimes a lot of the writing can be a bit drier, slower paced, and just not as entertaining. It doesn't captivate you as well as it's telling the fairy tale. It's just kind of a much more drier, simplistic form of writing in a lot of cases for many of these fairy tales. But I kind of knew that going in, to be honest. I didn't expect it to have like these massive tomes and world building and descriptive writing like we get from classics like Wheel of Time and Cosmere. But I did enjoy the kind of darker, more occult aspects of the Grimm's fairy tales that we get throughout these stories. That is really what I wanted to pick it up and read it for. I love kind of that dark thematic elements in a lot of stories, and that is what made me decide I want to read all of Grimm's fairy tales. And I want to try out some other classics as well, like Hans Christian Andersen at some point as well. So I hope to get that eventually and kind of take a look into that. But overall, I would say this collection of Grimm's fairy tales, it was a good, enjoyable read. I did like it overall. Definitely, if this were a modern writing, it would probably be saying it was terrible, to be honest with you, just because of the sexist and racist overtones in a lot of the writing. But overall, as a historical book, knowing that was in it, if we set those aspects aside, I think I enjoyed the darker Grimm aspects of the writing. I enjoyed some of the mythos behind Grimm's fairy tales and some of the ideas discussed within Grimm's fairy tales. That is what I enjoyed about it. In the end, I do think it is worth reading. I think it'd be a good thing to pick up and read sometime if you're into that darker, more occult things. Kind of get an idea of where a lot of these fairy tale ideas came from to begin with. Forget the Disney version, read the original version, and just kind of look at how dark these things can get. And this is why we call it grim when something is dark. Grim dark is a term that we hear in the fantasy community, and I can't help but think that grim dark comes from Grimm's fairy tales, and they set the tone when they wrote these stories about what grim and what dark is, and grim in general. The term grim has really become known to mean something dark and disturbing and uncomfortable, and I just love that aspect of it. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Grimm's fairy tales collected works. I do want to say thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear from you on what you think. You could join my Discord, that'll be linked below. Comment down below, let me know what you thought of these fairy tales, if you've read them, or what you think, or if you'd like to read them based on what I've had to say today. I'd love to hear that as well. Anyway, I do want to say thank you so much for watching, and until next time, keep on reading. Bye!